Well, good morning. Thank you very much, dear Judith, for this very kind introduction. And thank you also from my side as the organizer to not only the previous speakers, Minister of Finance Jörg Wuttke, but also Dr. Bergsten, but obviously also to all the other speakers, those that join me in a minute for our panel and those that will follow us. Obviously also a great warm welcome to you out there in the audience for joining us for what should be a very interesting discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, Luxembourg for Finance has started this yearly conference in 2014 at a moment when China really started again to push its opening up. It has grown since to become the main trading partner of 128 countries around the world. Multinationals from everywhere had been producing cheaply in China to export to world markets, and then came to see also China as a market of vast opportunity with its 1.4 billion consumers. China's market indeed today matters for European firms, but also for firms from other continents. It matters to the point where even an announcement of the slight loosening of COVID restrictions in China has helped to boost the value of French luxury brand LVMH, which in turn has contributed to Paris stealing London's crown as the leading stock market in Europe. That is how much China actually matters. Chinese companies ventured out more and more and became welcome investors. More Chinese banks set up branches and subsidiaries in many countries where they were received with open arms by authorities of financial centers eager to be designated as renminbi hubs. And China opened its capital markets for foreign investors, hungry for RMB exposure, and of course the high returns that come with 6 to 7% growth rates. This brought banks and asset managers from around the world also to China. Now, fast forward to today, ladies and gentlemen, and this love affair has met a number of bumps. It even appears to be heading for a breakup, or in today's language, a decoupling. To put it mildly, China's star seems to be losing its shine in many Western countries where politicians today can score cheap points by bashing China. Obviously and undeniably, there are issues that have emerged from market access conditions, obviously also to diverging views on important things like human rights. How do businesses and financial institutions adapt to the growing tensions and navigate the shoals of doing business in China? Will China's prolonged COVID restrictions have leave lasting scars to the way multinationals are viewing doing business in China? What conclusions are we to draw from the recent Party Congress and China's direction under President Xi? Well, these are some of the questions we will be discussing in the next 30 minutes. And to do that, I am joined by a panel of stellar China experts, starting with Dr. Jörg Wuttke, who's the chief representative of Germany's BASF in China and also a long-standing chairman, president of the European or the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. He's also a member of the advisory board of the Mercator Institute for China Studies, MERIX in Berlin. And he is, notwithstanding his young age, an old China hand, what you truly called an old China hand, because he has lived in Beijing for more than 3 decades and has, I think, started his love affair with China more than 40 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. We are also joined by Houze Song. Houze is a fellow at MacroPolo, a US research institute, where he leads the think tank's work on China's economy. Houze writes, for instance, MP Econ, a Substack research node on the Chinese economy. His work is read by market participants and policymakers and is regularly quoted by major media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Financial Times, Bloomberg and New York Times. And then, last but certainly not least, Dr. Huiyao Wang, known to us as Henry and to many people around the world as well, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, CCG, the leading Chinese non-governmental think tank. He's, among many other functions, also vice chairman of China Association of International Economic Cooperation under Ministry of Commerce, and holds different leadership roles at the Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs, the China National Committee for Pacific Economic Cooperation, and is the Dean of the Institute of Development Studies of Southwestern University of Finance and Economics of China. Now, you may have all been impressed, ladies and gentlemen, about the 46 books that Dr. Bergsten has written, but you should know that Henry Wang has written nearly 100 books on China in both Chinese and English. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this panel, let us get started. And maybe, if I may, start with Jörg Wuttke. You have been in China for many years. You have seen the different trends, the different crises, the different highs and lows. What is today, from your vantage point as the president of the EU Chamber of Commerce, the business sentiment among companies in China?
Well, Nicolas, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm afraid that I qualify for the world all around. Aging with China was a privilege, and I love to be here. I've witnessed the largest economic comeback story in human history, and now, of course, I'm eager to figure out where China's heading. Again, if we are looking at the European Chamber, which has offices in 9 cities in China, 1,800 members. We have just published our position paper in September. That's the Bible about where the issues are in China. And again, it has 430 pages and 967 recommendations, telling you 2 things. First of all, China is a damn difficult market. Market access is still very problematic for particularly the service sector. But it also tells you that our members are committed to China. They believe the reformability of China. Otherwise, we wouldn't produce nearly 1,000 recommendations for the leadership. It would rather be collecting dust in the shelf. So we are still out there hoping that China actually can move down the road of reform and opening up. But what we have realized in this period of time of, as put it, bumpy road, is that we have top 10 companies, consistently European companies, putting money into the Chinese market, including my own. And the reason for it is that there is no second market anywhere close to the size of the Chinese economy. For example, in the car industry, it's about 33% global market is in China. In the machinery market, China is as big as US, Europe, and Japan put together. And in my own backyard, the chemical sector, China stands for 50%, meaning if you're not at the table, you're going to be in the menu. So no chances to actually look around to do something else. Hence, we will invest money in China. But what we have realized recently is that from the top 10 that used to contribute 50% of foreign direct investment from Europe into China, now they stand for 80+%. So what is wrong with all the other companies? Well, SMEs are primarily putting their operations on hold. They are putting basically resources in here in order to maintain the operations, but not really much more money. And they're looking for alternatives because their owners or the CEOs cannot easily travel. So it is up to the top 10 in order to make up the difference. If you take aside the big BMW acquisition of billions in the first quarter, actually we have noticed that the European investment in China in the first half of this year went down by 72%. Again, telling you that the big boys stay here, put in more money, but the others apparently are really looking for options, which is a concern to us because it is an ill representation of what European companies have to offer. We are in an uncertain period of time. Certainly COVID is to be blamed for that one. We have new policies coming out that really don't find the traction yet. We are supposed to get tested every day, but then the test stations, for example, here in Beijing stopped. We have a new policy 5+3, which indicates China is easing up in order to attract foreign visitors. But if you land in the wrong city of China, such as European Chamber employees just did, you do your 7 days, you do 3 days of home quarantine, and then 15 days in Tianjin, you can't get into the neighboring city of Beijing. You have to go to Shenyang, do 15 days, and then you can come back. So all of a sudden, the whole system turns into 7 plus 3 plus 30. In a way, it's easier to get from Korea, from Tianjin to Korea and back to Beijing than from Tianjin to Beijing. So we have lots of domestic traveling issues there. And that, of course, puts a damper on sentiment. And sentiment is what I worry most about it. China has deep pockets. They can deal with the real estate crisis. They, I'm sure, can deal with a number of things. But the sentiment, particularly among those that matter the most of us, Chinese private enterprises, is taking a hit. And those were the guys bringing China to where they are today. So let's hope that they actually find their place in the economy in order to contribute again to what they did over the last 10 years.
Jörg, if I listen to you, I get a very clear sense about the reasons why, as you say, SMEs or smaller companies put their activities in China on hold, which seems to be, if I interpret you correctly, mostly COVID-related and due to the restrictions. So political reasons, are they also contributing to this in one way or another among your members?
Not yet, or not at this stage. If you excuse that, of course, COVID policy is a political decision, and we could challenge that, which we have done in the European Chamber. We thought the zero tolerance is great for 2 years. It buys you time to do vaccination. The part of vaccination was missing. But overall, we don't have anybody moving away because the Communist Party has rearranged its furniture. So in a way, we don't really see companies leaving China. Again, SMEs are putting the operations on hold, not on hold, as a matter of on autopilot. They invest a little bit, but far less than the economy would actually justify. And of course, the COVID policy, the downturn of the economic growth, the World Bank says 2.8% this year. Then all of a sudden, the rest of Asia at 5.3% looks very much more charming. And then guys go to Singapore, Jakarta, Thailand, look at this. And that's what I worry about, that they find an appetite. China cannot really open up, and they might stay there. Again, that only refers to the majority of my members, the SMEs, the Big Ten are here to stay because there's no other option. So in a way, politics is not the driving force, it's market.
Okay, let's maybe turn to Houze and get from him his view on what really he sees in terms of evolution of trade and investment numbers. Houze, in your work as a China economic analyst, where do you see this tending? Some people, Dr. Bergson has said that China-US trade is plummeting. Others, if you look at the numbers, would say that is not exactly the case. What is happening, both for trade, for investments, FDI, as well as maybe portfolio investments?
Thanks for the invite. Yeah, during my research, it seemed to me that although that many people fear that with the trade war and the recent geopolitical tensions, that China will be gradually and decoupling from the rest of the world, but the data doesn't support this view. For example, China, despite the trade war and the recent tensions, China's share in global trade has actually increased compared to 2018. It's now at a record high level, and it remains the world's largest exporter. But in the meantime, you see actually the composition of the trade, especially export, that the share of export, Chinese export, that manufactured, produced by foreign firm, has been keep declining. Actually, this trend of declining can be traced back to the 2008 global financial crisis, albeit the cause may be different now than previously. That if you trace the data to a decade back, that you see that initially there was a quite rapid declining of Chinese export manufactured by foreign firms in China. And this trend has stabilized somewhat around 2016, 2017, but since the onset of the trade war, that we see the foreign share of Chinese export continue to decline. And this trend continues up till now. But on the other hand, you see, especially during since the global recovery, the global reopening since COVID, that China's export has been growing at double digit. So basically, we have two pictures. One is that there are fewer foreign firms that manufacturing in China for the world. But in the meantime, the global demand for Chinese goods continue to be very robust. So that's on the trade front. And on the investment front, I agree with that it's not the picture is not very promising, especially FDI. FDI, once you removed Hong Kong, the money coming from Hong Kong, which actually includes a lot of the money that actually raised by Chinese firms from Hong Kong. So once you exclude FDI from Hong Kong, FDI from the rest of the world into China has been largely flat since 2017. Given that the size of the Chinese economy has increased by 30–40% during the same time, this means the relative percentage of FDI in China's total economy has declined. So in this sense, FDI part is not, the picture is not very optimistic. But on the other hand, the portfolio side is the picture is more promising, that both inward and outward investment, you see that there has been some moderate growth over the years. On the one hand, it's really because the Beijing has removed some of the previous restrictions on foreign portfolio investment into China, for example, through the Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, Shenzhen Stock and Bond Connect program. On the other hand, because the strong performance of China's exporter sectors, that actually China's current account surplus has been accumulating again, basically since 2020. So because China now still runs, for example, this year, China is projected to run current account surplus larger than 2% of GDP. That basically means more than $20 billion current account surplus annually. So one way or another, that Beijing and the Chinese, especially Chinese exporters, has to recycle those current account surplus and invest them in the rest of the world. And actually, here, I think there are definitely more work to do, because currently the restrictions on domestic investors' ability to invest abroad is still limited.
Good.
So yeah, so that's basically what the current trade and investment picture tell us.
Okay, thank you very much for that candid assessment. And that allows me then maybe also to ask Henry, with the challenges that have been drawn by Jörg and Houze, what can we expect from the Chinese leadership following the Party Congress? What are the priorities, in particular, in terms of business?
Yes, thank you, Nicolas, and it's great to join this great forum. And I think that the just concluded not too long ago, the 20th Party Congress has set quite a few objectives. I mean, that should be really watched out by business. First is, I think they emphasize that the Chinese path of modernization. Basically, I think now China is really wants to find a unique way of sustaining its economy. I mean, we know that China is, basically 60% of the private sector, generate 80 to 90% of the employment, and of course, over 50% of the tax revenue as well. But we have another 20% SOE that does all the social responsibility, disaster relief, and all those dirty jobs that public welfare jobs type of things. So like build a speed railway that is not really profitable but needed in China, and of course parachute 40,000 medical staff into Wuhan to do the COVID fighting and things like that, or earthquake relief big flood control and things like that. So I think China is a big country, and they need that. They need that force. And there's another 20% of multinationalism and multilateral corporations, and then they actually employs 40 to 50 million Chinese employment. Like Foxconn employs over 2 million, just one company. So they are actually generate almost 40 to 50% of China import and export. So that's I think that kind of unique this synergy, and then the more diversified economy is really hybrid economy is really what China's unique model that paved the way for the Chinese path of modernization. So that should be noted. I think China, as I said again, they're going to continue. And President Xi said that his final speech, China door will be open wider and wider. So, and also from the the 4 top new standing committee members that has been promoted, including the Li Qiang, the second standing committee member. They all coming from a very developed area. Like Li Qiang has come up from Wenzhou. He actually, in Zhejiang, he cultivated Alibaba. In Shanghai, he imported Tesla. I mean, so they are really market-oriented. So if they are coming into the play, I think China will follow this market open and positive path for the future. And in terms of another thing I think we should notice is, of course, there's a lot of talk about common prosperity in the party's report. But common prosperity is that, President Xi always attached great importance. We're having a deglobalization, we have a nationalism, populism. So we should avoid some mistakes other countries, there's a polarizing of the society, there's a loose middle class, and things like that. On the contrary, I think China has paid attention to that and first lifted 800 million people out of poverty. Now for the common prosperity, they're coming out to, how about this 300 million migrant workers? There's 2 million working for Foxconn, for example, for Apple. How to elevate them into middle class. And then China has cultivated the 400 million middle class. What about the rest of the 1 billion, population? When can we make them into middle class? So this indicates that we have a huge potential in China. And in the next, 10, 20 years, China middle class is going to grow, and China is going to really have a lot of things to offer. So I think, even now the COVID has relaxed just a little bit. You can see the stock market bouncing back, and there's a lot of, optimism, coming back. I'm sure China will continue to do that. Definitely, they're not silly. They're not foolish. I mean, if things doesn't work for them, there's no reason for them to continue on that. So I think they will optimize their system, as they use the word optimize. I'm sure they'll continue to optimize that. And then of course also we see recently the G20 meeting just out of Bali, that I think President Xi and President Biden, first time they met in person since 3 years. And they're old friends, but they're meeting in person with great smile, big shake hand without mask. It sent a huge picture, sent a huge messages around the world. But I was quite surprised. President Biden even comes out to say, make a special news conference saying that, look, he doesn't think China is going to impose imminent attack on Taiwan. So that's really, relieved a lot of business concerns. A lot of B plan was making. They were expecting China probably going to attack Taiwan next year or next 5 years. President Biden said there's no imminent threat on that. So I think this is a great message. I think hopefully now that when both leaders talk more, and then President Biden is sending Blinken to Secretary to Beijing, I'm sure there are going to be reciprocal visits. And I also talk about the economic, finance, and climate change and other matters. They're going to have respective officials to visit each other. I'm sure we can probably put a floor to the deteriorating free falling of the downward spiral in the last several years we've been seeing. And I'm glad now.
I hope so.
Yeah, but also now, of course, that President Biden and President Xi has gone through their domestic election. They look stronger than they used to be. So I think now they can probably talk about really business concerns and really do some common sense things rather than decoupling from each other. So I think we read a lot into that. I think it gives a quite cautious, optimistic picture ahead.
Good. Well, we need optimism, but China, as you rightly say, has always been very rational when it came to its business strategies. Now, Jörg, do you share the optimism that has just been expressed by Henry concerning the continued drive for reform as he interprets into the different appointments? I know
Well,
that
frankly,
you
it's
are
too early
a
to tell.
well-experienced reader of Chinese tea leaves. We Westerners, when we watch the party congress, are left to simply interpret certain gestures and very often get it wrong. But maybe with the subtitles that you can provide, we understand a little bit better.
Well, I wish I can tell you something definitive. Again, the political change is only concluded in March next year when the new government is in place. We have a bit of an unusual situation of having none of the state council members, meaning the government, representing on the Politburo. That is a period of uncertainty we're facing. So where does the messaging come from? Is Li Keqiang still speaking for China, or is the Politburo going to give us something we don't know? In particular, of course, in terms of COVID, would be nice in order to know where we are heading. At the same time, I'm facing a lot of meetings these days sought after by the Chinese party and the ministries in order to actually get explanations. There's a clear reaching out in order to explain to foreign business or the stakeholders like the European Chamber in order to tell them we're going to go down this road of reform and opening up and so forth. But again, the truth lies in the acts and not in rhetoric. We have to see. But at the same time, also, we are looking at market dynamics. As Henry pointed out, the urbanization is continuing, so meaning there is more economic firepower in order to actually move ahead. We have known from many other economies in East Asia, like Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, that after 40 years of opening up, they all faced a hiccup. They rebounded at different degrees. Of course, we hope that the largest economy in the world actually goes through this hiccup smooth and easy. But we don't know. In a sense, with $17,800 per capita GDP in PPP terms, and so there's a lot for China still to gain, and all our scenarios lead to the fact that even in the worst case, China's economy per capita is going to double by 2050. And again, that's worst case. The best case, look up our position paper. It's actually quite charming to see there's a huge potential here. But again, we have to see 6 months of uncertainty is, of course, too long, but what can we do?
Yeah. If we now put ourselves in a position where we try to look into the future. Now, we all learned over the last 2 or 3 years that looking into the future is even more difficult than what we thought it was going to be. But if we try to look into the future, what will not only be China's economy, what will impact China's economy most, and how will we position ourselves as Europe or as the US? I don't know if President Biden and President Xi even touched on the recent US restrictions imposed on semiconductors, but probably that is one of the defining elements of their relationship. Or we talked before about, Jörg said that SMEs may put on hold some of their activities regarding the Chinese market. I read recently in a New York Times column penned by Thomas Friedman, a new acronym, ABC, standing for anything but China. Do you have the impression that the political rhetoric has already started to take root in business decisions, or is it, as we discussed before, currently still only travel restrictions mostly and other restrictions that make it difficult to do business? Is it the increasing heat of the political tensions that drive decisions? Maybe it's not only Chinese tech that, according to some, is becoming uninvestable, but is it China in general that, for US players at least, we understand Europeans take a different view, but very often don't lag far behind Americans. How do you see this playing out? I don't know, Houze, if you want to say something about the escalation of the chip war that our American friends seem to be pursuing. Is that something that you see playing out on the economic sphere in China in terms of GDP?
The recent semiconductor ban will definitely have an impact on China's growth. but my guess it will be quite modest. I see now, right now, as what the estimate, I see that the kind of like the most, the top range estimate is something like 0.3, 0.4% of Chinese growth. So that's definitely not an insignificant number, but will that, for example, prevent China doubling its GDP during the next 15, 20 years? I don't think so, because if you look at the recent global history of economic development, you see that actually many countries have managed to achieve like GDP per capita of $20,000 without develop highly advanced industries like semiconductors. So I think semiconductor and other like AI and biotech, they're definitely good to have, but they're not essential, for example, for China to achieve income per capita of high income countries. On the other hand, I see that so far what I see from the data is that the impact of geopolitical tensions and U.S. tensions on Chinese economy is can be more properly described as death by 1,000 cuts, rather than that it will lead to a collapse or sudden stop in any particular sector. We are now seeing that from the data that there has been an acceleration, despite the recent data, there has also been the impact of COVID. So, but still, we are not seeing any signs of there's sudden accelerations of slowdown in foreign activities in China.
Okay. Jörg, any thoughts on this?
Well, definitely it was a shock to see to what extent the US is going to basically involve in banning China on the high-tech side. Again, we are in the real economy. We don't see an instant translation into the car, machinery or chemical sector, but of course there will be a slower growth in the innovative part of this economy. These are our partners and suppliers as well as customers. So eventually, yes, there might be an impact. At the same time, again, the economy is not just growing on that segment. ABC, I mean, my friend Tom coined that. It has more possibly to do with fund managers. The real economy is still, with the big boys, is going to go ahead. The SMEs wait for China to sort itself out on COVID. They put it on hold. They look for options. And again, and that's into China's field in order to make sure that the transition from now into opening up and having gone on like the rest of the world is very important. The longer this takes, the more people will look into stakes in Indonesia, in Malaysia, Thailand, in India. They're not going to come back. Again, it's too early for us to tell. The instant reporting from the 20th Party Congress was more like, more communism mentioned. Xi Jinping mentioned Marx 15 times, the market 3 times. That's certainly not very conducive for foreign business or business as a whole. I think the core to us is not how they treat us. They need our technologies. We are in the real economy. What happens to the Chinese private enterprises, how they will be integrated, and that is to us where the Chinese economic futures are going to lie.
Okay, and maybe if I come back to you, Henry, and ask you, what is it that you think China can or should do to reconnect to those businesses that we just heard are turning elsewhere?
Yeah. Thank you, Nicolas. I think that in terms of this chips policy that the latest U.S. government on that, I think it's really a silly, it's really against economic law, against competitive advantage. I mean, the reason those semiconductor companies like in Taiwan or in South Korea can grow so big is because China is the largest buyer. China is the largest market, and they are so close to China. And so I think, if they do that, it's a semi-suicidal action that they're going to hurt their profit bottom lines. They're going to hurt R&D. They hurt many things, and actually force China to do it on its own, and maybe a few years delay, and China can probably make things happen. And we remember all the Soviet Union days. I mean, they blocked China on everything, but after a few years, China, made everything happen again as well. So I don't think it's a very wise policy. But I do have a little hope though that because since they had this high level visit meeting by President Xi and President Biden. So we're seeing more, business people, leaders, and big government officials traveling to China to talk. So I don't think the business can bear that. This kind of silly policy hurting business bottom line. Nobody can really hurt. So if the security issue can be really lifted somewhat, I think maybe economically they can lift somewhat as well. And I remember during the Trump era, when they even have the big tariff from China, there's always a backdoor to get some exemptions, to get some special category that can be exempted from tariff.
Was a good example.
That's right. So I hope they can do that. I mean, you talk about China. China is probably the best market synergy in the world. You have 280 million, college graduates among population. Every year produce 10 million college graduates. They have the 2/3 of global speed railways. They have this, out of the 10 largest container ports, 7 of them are in China. Out of the, I see U.S. is just starting to build the 5G station. There are already 2 million 5G stations across China. So where on earth can you find place, big market? So I think it's just in China for China would be really lucrative enough for all the companies to come. Let alone we can still have another 400 million middle class coming up. In addition to the 400 million they have now. So I'm quite optimistic on that, actually.
Good. Well, I'm not going to ask Jörg and Houze if they share your optimism, because I did that a few minutes ago. But I will ask Jörg and Houze for one last comment in conclusion on China. Where do you see China in 5 years? Is it still the main trading partner of 128 countries? Is it still this very vast market of opportunity? Jörg, maybe you start.
Well, I'm a bit pessimistic about next year, but 5 years from now, I'm sure that China finds track again. China has a great comeback gene, has proven it time and again. I hope that they are going to be a strong trading partner, but more on a level playing field, meaning that they are not just shipping 4 items to Europe and importing 1 item. I hope that China opens up more in order to also credibly create more jobs in Europe. That would help a great way in order to solve a couple of these challenges. Though China has basically a long stretch of development to go, and it's for me always the largest risk in the China business is not to be in China.
Very well put. Houze, you have one last comment on where do you see China in 5 years? Optimistic?
I would say I'm cautiously optimistic, but we also need to have a realistic expectation. For example, on the domestic demand issues, on whether China will generate more, China will import more and generate jobs, for example, in Europe and America. I would say that it's possible that China will import more, but we should have really realistic expectations, because I think this ultimately the root cause of China's insufficient demand is lying in its domestic income distribution. That the household sector has the share of income goes to the household sector is quite low in China compared to global average. And China basically, since the onset of global financial crisis more than a decade ago, China has already begun this process of trying to increase the share of income goes to the household sector, which will enable China to generate more domestic demand. So through the past 10+ years, China has made some progress, but progress is quite modest. So I guess in a kind of like, even in the best case scenario, I would say that 5 years now, that we still should be quite cautious about how much progress China can make on this front. But still, I think the direction is really ultimately what really matters. The direction, the outlook, that the rest of the world need to have confidence in China, that knows China is on this right path, that China will continue, the property sector, the private sector in China will continue to prosper, and Chinese household income will continue to increase at least similar at the same rate as the overall GDP growth. As long as those things happen, I think that the rest of the world and the foreign business confidence in China may improve from the current cyclical low point.
Good. Yes, I remember vividly when I moved to Shanghai 10 years ago that there was this paper by the World Bank and by Liu He on China 2030 that recommended also boosting internal consumption, and 10 years later, we see it's not so easy. But I also see that in the same period of time, China has continued to grow and still is one of the leading markets, so certainly has quite a lot going for it. Besides all the challenges and the issues that obviously we need to deal with our Chinese friends in order to make it possible for businesses to help us also boost growth and create jobs both in China and in Europe, which is to all of our benefits. With this, gentlemen, we come to the end of our panel. I thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. We could obviously go on because China is a topic that certainly has much more to offer than something you can fit into 35 minutes. But we have to stop here, and there will be other elements for which I now hand back to our moderator, Judith Bogner. Thank you very much, gentlemen.